Welcome back to the Lumiose Post, where we talk about all things Pokemon, and today we will be talking about the rise and what could very well be the fall of one of, if not my most favorite features in the Pokemon games, and that is regional variants. So let's get right into it. So regional variants were first introduced to us in the Pokemon games, Pokemon Sun and Moon. This was kind of a very celebratory game. It was releasing on the 20th anniversary of the Pokemon franchise, so these games saw a lot of things like references to past games, characters straight up returning from past games, and another thing they did is regional variants for older Pokemon. What these are basically very similar to an actual thing that occurs here in the real world. It is where a Pokemon has had to adapt to a region, and because of that, its appearance has changed, as well as its typing and potentially even its stats and abilities. So a great example of this was at the time in Sun and Moon, you had Exeggutor. Exeggutor was a Pokemon that we knew all the way back from the early days of Gen 1, and it's a short little palm tree guy. But not in Alola. In Alola, it's actually a tall palm tree guy. It is now a grass dragon type instead of the grass psychic type. And they explain this Exeggutor to be a thing because of the intense amount of sunlight it is able to get in the Alolan region. And it just caused it to be a completely different form of Exeggutor. In fact, it even states that this is the original form of Exeggutor. This is something that was really, really big at the time. It was just an instant hit with fans, right? Like, everybody loved this. There was a little bit of some upset that in Sun and Moon, this was reserved exclusively for Generation 1 Pokemon, but people really did like this gimmick, and I think it's kind of understandable that it was for only Generation 1 Pokemon at the time, because again, they're kind of feeling the waters with this gimmick. They also are wanting to celebrate the 20-year anniversary of the Pokemon franchise, which, of course, began with the Gen 1 game. So obviously, there's going to be a little more favoritism to Gen 1 at first. Also, too, this is the generation that kind of most needs it, right? That's probably going to be the generation where the most Pokemon have been, like, power crept out. And that's exactly what these forms did. Not only did they refresh the designs, but they also gave a lot of competitive viability to some of these Pokemon. Like Marowak and Muck were two Pokemon that you didn't really see a lot in the competitive world, but Alolan Muck and Alolan Marowak actually became pretty popular Pokemon to use competitively. So just an example of how these forms were more than just a cool shout out to Gen 1, but were also something that revitalized the actual Pokemon. Then we had Gen 8 debut with Pokemon Sword and Shield, and these games actually brought back regional variants, which kind of got people really excited, right? Because now it's like, okay, maybe this wasn't just something that they did to celebrate 20 years, but is actually something that's going to be a staple in the Pokemon franchise, and it's going to be a constant going forward, you know? And that's a crazy exciting thought. That's really cool. And not only that, but they branched beyond Gen 1 this time around. Sure, we got some Gen 1 forms with Weezing and Ponyta, but we also had forms all the way up to Generation 5 with Pokemon like Stunfisk or Darumaka. So it was just a great time to be here, because like now it's not only is this a staple, but you never know what Pokemon, what gen might get this, and that's just a crazy cool concept. And not only that, but they expanded on the idea of regional variants by adding in something called regional evolutions. And what these are basically evolutions that occur only to a Pokemon's regional form. So this allowed some Pokemon, like Meowth, to experience a completely different evolution when it's in its Galarian form. Meowth normally evolves into Persian, and even its Alolan form evolves into Persian, but its Galarian form evolves into something called Berserker. There is no Galarian Persian. Likewise, this also gave some Pokemon an additional evolution when that Pokemon didn't originally have it. Like Farfetch'd is a Pokemon that could not evolve, but Galarian Farfetch could evolve into Sirfetch'd. Likewise, Corsola can evolve, but Galarian Corsola can evolve into Cursola, which was very exciting, but did also kind of face some backlash, of course, because, you know, now Farfetch'd is kind of irrelevant, right? Like, why would you use Farfetch'd over, I mean, first off, there's the fact that it's a normal flying type, and we have, like, a gazillion of those, but then also now, like, there's a Farfetch'd with an evolution, and Cantonian Farfetch'd doesn't get that, so it kind of, instead of revitalizing the design, kind of erases it, which it did get some backlash. Didn't want to throw that in there, but overall, this was a generally very accepted feature. It's one I love. Surfetch'd is one of my favorite Pokemon, so honestly, I dig it. Not only this, but something really cool that we saw with regional variants in these games was that with DLC, we got more Galarian forms. We got the Galarian Slowpoke line, and then also we even got the first legendary Pokemon to get regional forms. The legendary birds from the Kanto region now had Galarian forms. Galarian Articuno, Moltres, and Zapdos. And that was an insane thing to experience. And by the way, it hasn't even happened since. So that's just a really cool thing that I wanted to mention, that they really not only brought this idea back, this idea of regional variation back, but just expanded on it in so many ways. And then also in Gen 8, we did have Pokemon Legends Arceus. This was another game that gave us regional variants. In fact, it kind of felt like, to me at least, regional variants were more at the forefront of this than they had been before. Perhaps this is because there weren't really any new lines in Legends Arceus. There was a Namarus, which is technically a new line, but it's a new member of the Kami Quartet, which was an established thing. So these new Pokemon this time around were really the new evolutions or the new regional variants that were given out this time. And they continued to do this regional evolution idea as well. So we had Pokemon like Overquill and Sneasler that only occurred from evolving from the Galarian forms of their pre-evolutions. We also got starter Pokemon regional forms. We have a Hisuian Samurott, Hisuian Typhlosion, and a Hisuian Decidueye. Again, something that hasn't been done since, unless Legends EA changes that. And, you know, had not been done before. And this one was mind-blowing. I mean, come on, guys. Y'all remember that feeling when we found out that there was going to be, whether it was by leaks or not, a regional form for your starter Pokemon? Ugh, that's take me back. But at this point, we've had 3 new, and I say that in quotes because while Hisui's not new because it's Sinnoh, Hisui as the name and the time period was new. So 3 new regions, and all 3 of these new regions brought in regional forms. You know, sure, Let's Go didn't, but that's because it was Kanto. Been there, done that. Brilliant Diamond, Shining Pearl didn't. That's because it's Sinnoh. Been there, done that. And, you know, we did get some Sinnohan forms and the Hisuian forms we got in the Hisui game, Pokemon Legends Arceus. So this really was seeming like it was going to be something that continued. Like, it was a guarantee at this point that regional variants are a staple of the franchise. We can look forward every new gen to new Pokemon and new regional variants. So what happened? Because now we are on the cusp of Legends EA, and, you know, after that, at some point, if it's a year or 2 after that, we are going to be seeing Gen 10, and there just doesn't seem to be a lot of certainty, at least not as much as there was before, of regional variants continuing. Why did that happen? Well, it's all because of Scarlet and Violet, and Scarlet and Violet did give us new regional variants. We had Paldean Wooper, Paldean Tauros, and we even got a regional evolution for Paldean Wooper in Clodsire. So, you know, we're seeing this continuation of it and an expansion of it. In fact, another expansion of it was that we had breeds introduced now. Not only is there a Paldean Tauros, but this Paldean Tauros comes in 3 different breeds: a combat breed, an aqua breed, or a blaze breed. So what's to worry about? Well, that's actually exactly what we were worried about, is that these were the only regional forms introduced. It was just Tauros and Wooper. And then DLC came along, and sure, the DLC wasn't set in the Paldea region, but we didn't get any Kitakamian forms or Unovan forms, nothing like that. Just no new forms. And instead, we actually get this new concept introduced, and this is one that hasn't been officially named by the Pokemon Company, but has been kind of fan-named convergent forms or regional fakes by the Pokemon fan community. And those are the things like Toedscool, Toedscruel, Wiglet, Wugtrio, and Poltergeist and Sinistcha. These Pokemon that are new Pokemon, but look very similar to an older Pokemon. They're a little bit different from regional variation. They seem to more so represent convergent evolution than they do like an adaptation to an environment. You know, you're not going to see a jellyfish adapt by becoming a mushroom, right? So you can see the difference there versus before we were just seeing foxes become Arctic foxes. So This really just seemed to kind of, for me at least, look like, ooh, they might be steering away from regional forms to go more into this convergent thing. Why is that? Well, I've actually touched on this in videos before, but basically, there's not a lot of sustainability to the idea of regional variation. And what I mean by that, to very briefly summarize, is that right now, sure, it's pretty easy for you to get access to these regional forms, but as time goes on, they won't be. And we're even actually starting to see this a little bit with some Pokemon. Like, for example, Alolan Rattata. Say you want to get an Alolan Rattata in Pokemon Home. Your options are to trade to find someone, or you will have to buy a 3DS, which they're not really selling 3DSs anymore, so you're going to have to buy used. You're going to have to buy a used Sun and Moon or Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon game and get Alolan Rattata, or you can buy Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee and get an Alolan Rattata from that game via like an NPC trade. And that's fine, because that's a Switch game, and we're on the Switch, so it's all good. But you have to think about the longevity of this, right? At some point, the Switch will be to us what, like, the DSi is, right? It'll be such an old console. And at that point, it's going to be a little bit harder to get access to those Alolan forms, those Galarian forms, those Hisuian forms, those Paldean forms. And they can keep adding ways to do it in game, like with things like NPC trades or things like the Blueberry Academy that are like artificial environments that allow these Pokemon to live. But again, there's just not a lot of longevity to that, especially as these forms rack up in numbers, both in the number of Pokemon that have them and in the number of regions that have them, right? And we've seen Game Freak look at sustainability in the future of their games and make other decisions that the fans weren't really happy about. Like, for example, Dexit. This is so that they can do animations and stuff going forward, and you might say, whoa, that's not the case, that's actually a lie, Game Freak's a liar. And I'm not here to debate whether or not that's true, but it will be true one day. You know, at some point, there will be too much Pokemon to fit on one console. At some point, there'll be 10,000 Pokemon. Can they really fit 10,000 Pokemon on one game? Sure, that's such a long time from now, but you get my point. And that's actually just saying the Pokemon, not even like the multiple different forms of that Pokemon. Like Rotom's just one, but it's got all these forms. So you see what I mean here. But see, the beauty of this is that this problem is fixed by convergence, right? Because these convergents are being treated as completely new Pokemon. So, you know, Toadscool and Wiglet are treated the same as like Tarantula and, I don't know, Flittle. They're just brand new Pokemon. So it won't be weird to see Wild Toadscool in the Gen 10 region. It wouldn't even be that weird to see them appear in Legends EA. But it would be a little weird to just see random Wild Alolan Executor walking around in Kalos, or random Wild Galarian Weezing floating around in the Gen 10 region. That would be a bit of an immersion breaker, because these Pokemon are supposed to only exist in Alola or only exist in Galar. Or are they? Because we do have a game, it is Pokemon Snap. Alright, look, I love Pokemon Snap. I know it's not mainline, but hear me out here. Let me cook, please. Just let me cook. So, with new Pokemon Snap, we actually see the Lentil region, which has these islands where they're all part of one region, and you're able to find different forms of different Pokemon here. Like, for example, you can find an Alolan Ninetales here. You can also find a Cantonian Ninetales here. So the implication would be, for this universe, that these forms are not region-based, but are actually based on environment. And I think that's actually what Pokemon needs to do going forward with these. So this would make a Pokemon like Alolan Vulpix, instead of being an Alolan form, would actually be a Tundra form. So this would be Vulpix's Tundra form. Not its Alolan form, its Tundra form. Some other examples of Tundra forms could include Galarian Darumaka and Mr. Mime, or perhaps Hisuian Braviary and Hisuian Quillfish. So the forms would be purely based on environment. So like, aside from the Tundra forms, you could have forest forms with things like Hisuian Lilligant and Galarian Ponyta, or coastal forms with Alolan Executor and Galarian Slowpoke. And this actually is kind of backed up in-game too by the Blueberry Academy. The Blueberry Academy is creating these artificial environments for these Pokemon to be able to thrive in, and their polar biome is able to be a good habitat for Alolan Vulpix, but also Hisuian Quillfish, implying that it's kind of more climate and environment based than it actually is region based, right? And then likewise, you see Galarian Slowpoke living in the same environment as Alolan Exeggutor and Alolan Muck. And I actually think that Legends EA is a great game to start implementing this idea. Legends EA is supposed to be entirely set within Lumiose City, so it's going to be all in one city. So it doesn't really makes sense how we could see some crazy diverse regional forms here. At least at this time, we don't know how we could, but this is a great time to implement something called like urban forms, right? So these would be Pokemon that have been kind of industrialized or urbanized and are living here in Lumiose City. Not only can they make new forms based on this that could then continue to exist in other city areas in future Pokemon games and Pokemon generations, but they could take some older regional forms and kind of retcon them into urban forms, right? An urban Rattata could easily be Alolan Rattata. An urban Muck could easily be the Alolan Muck. Galarian Weezing, urban Weezing. You see what I mean? Now, I'm going to be completely honest. I would not like this idea. I really like the idea of a region-specific form. You know, that's something that we see in our world, and that's something that I thought not only made the Pokemon world a little bit cooler, but made these specific regions a little bit cooler, right? Like, Alola will always be associated to me as the place where you can find true Exeggutor, you know? And Galar's the place where you can find true Zigzagoon. And that makes these regions even more special than they already are in my heart. And I like that, and I hate to see that go. But again, you gotta think about longevity, because not only is this important to fans, because, you know, you're getting new Pokemon fans every year, right? And some of them might be adults who have jobs and can afford to purchase a 3DS, you know, that's being sold by a scalper for $400 and buy a $90 Ultra Sun from GameStop. Sure, maybe someone can do that, but little 6-year-old Timmy, he can't do that, and he loves Pokemon so much. So how are they going to please him? And then also, too, you have this issue with VGC, right? A lot of regional variants have succeeded in being very good competitively. We see Hisuian Arcanine is a competitive threat both in singles and in VGC. Same thing with Overquill, which is a regional evolution to Hisuian Quillfish. So you kind of have to make sure you're keeping those forms alive so that you're being fair to new VGC players. People who get into VGC don't want to have to purchase a home subscription and like 6 games to be able to transfer their Pokemon up so that they can use something that is kind of dominating the competitive field, right? Again, it's not something I'd like, but it is something I could see them doing. I'm wanting to discuss it with y'all because the lack of forms, like the small amount of forms in Scarlet and Violet, plus the fact that this is a real problem that Game Freak will face one day, if not today, then one day, you know, 10 games from now. And coupled with the fact that they are making these convergence or regional fakes, it just really seems like this could be a direction they're going in. But I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think this is a direction that Game Freak could go in? How would you feel about this if this happened? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. And until next time, I'll see all of you later.